there, ladies and gentlemen. It is Tuesday, it is 4 p.m. Eastern Time, and that means it's time for Expert Momentum. And we're doing something a little bit different today. This is actually always my favorite format of show, my favorite type of show to do. And the reason I like it the most is because of the interaction, and I know I'm helping exactly with stuff that you need to know right now. And in particular, a couple of these questions are really huge this week. In fact, there's a joke coming about some of that I found in a recent article that I'll be talking about when we get to our first question today. But I love Q&A episodes. I love to be out here making sure that I'm responding directly to what you need. Hey, Kim's here. I haven't heard from you in a long time. I know that you've got to be preparing for an amazing Camp Exhale coming up. And so, again, for those of you out there who want to be speakers and experts and want to know how to walk the talk, you should know Kim, who, if you don't know her, connect with her in the comments, and Anik out there as well, who do amazing events in Canada. And I know they want to expand those all over the place. So I'm sure you've got questions as you're getting closer to the event. And as always, I've got here, and a book launch in June. So you've got plenty going on. Kim can dominate this whole episode. I love it when people show up live and we have a Q&A episode, because for a lot of people, if you're watching it on the replay, sometimes for some reason people are hesitant to ask their questions on the replay. I don't know why, because I love the questions I get during the week. I respond to them right away, and then I do future episodes about them. So don't feel like you missed out if you're not here on the live episode and you're like, oh man, I needed an answer about this specific thing, or I needed you to clarify more about a specific topic. Make sure that you ask those. Make sure if you're jumping on live, you ask your questions. You can send those to me via email. And the questions from this week came from all over the place. My email, the social universe. I actually had a big giveaway last week, and I'm going to start by talking about that, because I know a lot of you watch me and you kind of are seeing what I'm doing. And so first and foremost, I am very grateful to have been a part of the Rocking Online Visibility giveaway. And so it was super cool to be side by side with huge experts, like some of the most world-renowned experts in the space, like Gina Gabellini, Jay Facette, Milana Lashinsky. I mean, there were so many. Steve Olsher, I know, is up today on that. So again, at any opportunity I get to share the stage or to share the virtual stage with brilliant people, I'm so appreciative of being able to do that. And before that, as a result of all of the changes that are going on based on our first question, it kind of impacted my promotion. I wanted to have conversations with my Facebook rep. I wanted to see what was going on out in the space. And so before I get too deep into talking specifics about that summit, which I'm going to do as we go throughout this episode, our first question, and it's kind of a big generic one that was asked to me, comes from Terry. And she asked me, can you talk about the GDPR? And can you tell me what it is and what I have to do? So if you haven't been, checking your email recently, you were on vacation, you've been away from the office or from the news and all of those things, then you may not have heard of what the GDPR is. And for the most part, I don't think it's that people haven't heard of the GDPR. It's that they have no idea whether or not they're supposed to actually be doing something about it. And for the most part, I know I have audience. I'm lucky to have audience all over the world. But for the most part, it depends a lot on where you are and what your practices are. Obviously, as a marketer, it's something that I've had my eye on since the beginning of the year. And it's a lot of the reason behind, what people are calling the adpocalypse now. So people have totally jumped on my apocalypse bandwagon, by the way, since I was calling this the Facebook apocalypse. It's now being called by marketers the adpocalypse. But let's talk about GDPR. And actually, I have a bunch of different resources and references. I'm just going to speak to some specific points to talk about that. But I want to talk about a couple of different articles and kind of give a short little summary of what GDPR is. And so the first and most important thing about GDPR is there isn't a ton outside of the regulation itself that a lot of people really know about it. We know that once the deadline trips, which is May 25th, so once that deadline passes, we're going to see a flurry of activity. But at the simplest, most easy to understand level, what it means is that customers now own the rights to their data. So that's the basics of it. So when you visit a website and you have either a cookie or any kind of tracking that's put on your machine, you own the right to that data. So now the way it's going to work in Europe is when you visit a website and they want to track you, whether it's to keep stats, like analytics on what you're doing on their site, whether it's that they want to do retargeting type advertising with you, or they want to monitor you in any way, if they want to collect your email address, if they want to send you a free gift, if they want to do anything that involves any personal data, the way the EU frames this now is that you own that data as the consumer. The company does not. So along with that comes a number of different rights, which is the right to be forgotten, which is really the biggest one, which says, all right, if I don't want that company to be storing any of my data, whether I visited their pages or not, whether I opted in for something or not, then I don't want them to be able to do that. And you have the right to, essentially let them know. It also has big impact on if there's a data breach, which again, most of this applies to very large companies. If your data is mishandled or bad actors get a hold of your data, like what just happened with that big Cambridge Analytica scandal. If something like that is happening, people have to be notified right away. So basically think of it as like a digital, mark of ownership of your data. So what does it mean to all of you out there? And I know that most of the information I'm seeing around, even for me as someone who's very familiar with digital marketing, retargeting, data analysis, it's super confusing for most people. And so the reality is, the most important thing that most of you need to know is, if you're collecting some sort of data, you have to make sure that it is opt-in. And opt-in, for the most part, for most of you out there who are watching this and you aren't super techie or you aren't big marketers, is going to be handled by the companies that are handling the data or that are storing the data. So in Google's case, like analytics or retargeting, Google is essentially the holder of that data, which means they are responsible for getting that consent, for having all the, the regulation pieces in place. The same thing is true of Facebook. Since Facebook holds that customer data, they're essentially responsible for maintaining that right to privacy, the right to be forgotten, all of those things. So when does it really start applying to you? So the reality is, when you start collecting personal data like email addresses, phone numbers, buyer information, any type of customer information that comes into a system. Now, the good news, again, for most of you out there, is that the systems that you work in, whether it's Infusionsoft or Aweber or MailChimp even, a lot of them have their eye on these privacy policies. They understand that now customers anywhere in Europe have the ability to get in and access and change that data and review that data. So many of these companies are handling that form of compliance. So there's all sorts of hearsay and updates as far as that's concerned. But for the most part, 99.9% of you have one major action to take, which is you need to update your site's privacy policy. Now, as a digital marketer, I've noticed that most people don't even bother to have a privacy policy, or they don't have anything on their site that references privacy for their customers. So if you don't have a privacy policy, you need to get one. And so I also, before I even start talking more about that, I want to give a huge shout out. Milana Lashinsky posted this link the other day in her Simplicity Circle group. If you're not a member of Simplicity Circle, you should check that out, but I'm going to show it on the screen. There is a website that she shared for a lot of you who are out there called freeprivacypolicy.com. I know they're going to be doing some more updates to this in the coming weeks and months to make it more GDPR compliant. It doesn't handle certain aspects of the GDPR, but if you need a privacy policy and you need to get it done quickly, you can do that. For most people, and this was true of me when I got started in the digital marketing space, I basically would look at privacy policies on other websites and adjust and adapt to our need. And if it was really serious, like I knew I was going to be doing an extensive spend in digital marketing, or I knew I was going to be collecting a lot of email addresses or building a big email list or something like that, then I would work with an attorney to make sure that that privacy policy was legit. But normally I would start from somewhere. So you can use a site like that. Again, thanks to Milana and Simplicity Circle for that great resource, freeprivacypolicy.com. Check that out if you need to get that done, or look at comparable sites in your industry that are covering that data. But again, what does your privacy policy have to do in detail? It has to let people know how you use the data. It has to give very clear instructions about what you do, how you use that data, what you're going to do with it. And again, for the most part, for those of us with email lists, we are essentially handling the compliance side when someone either buys something from us or they opt in from us. Now, again, there's lots of conversation, lots of extensive resources. I'm going to post many different articles in the comments of this video for you to be able to go through and review them. Because again, for me, I've primarily watched this as someone that is deep in the Facebook ads world and the Google world. And again, I checked with my email marketing provider. I use Infusionsoft. So I checked with all of them. And for the most part, outside of the privacy policy updates, the systems, for the most part, are handling it for me. But I need to be very clear with any customers that are coming or any future customers that might come in from Europe about what data I'm watching, what data I'm collecting, how I'm using it, what I'm doing with it. So if you're an ethical person, which I think most of you out there who would follow me or who would be watching this are, the reality is you're probably already doing something like this when someone opts into your stuff or when someone, checks into your website. The most important thing that you can do is let people clearly know what you're going to do. So if someone's opting in for a free gift, there should be a box right there or, a description right under the opt-in field that says what you do with the email address. All right, by opting in for this free gift, you're also opting in to receive, data, newsletters, whatever it is that you're going to do. But you, again, have to be very clear about that and transparent about that and what you're going to do. A lot of people are using checkbox plugins or they're using checkboxes on forms to do those kinds of things. A lot of that can do the same thing, but for the most part, a statement is going to do all you need. If someone is already a customer of yours, meaning they bought something from you either in person or in the online space, for the most part, that's going to handle it. That is, more consent than they need. And actually, a great article came up. I'm going to show this, and this is one of the articles I'm going to post right now that's pretty interesting is, obviously, since this is Europe, a lot of the European papers and such are going to be talking about this. And it's funny because The Guardian had this article that I spotted today that's basically saying, like, most GDPR emails that people are sending out right now are totally unnecessary because, they're sending them to buyers, they're sending them to people they have opted in, they're sending them to people they have the data for, but then there's some people who collected the data illegally to begin with, and they're sending out compliance or opt-in emails and stuff now, and they may not have gotten that data in the most legal or ethical way possible. So again, this is one of the topics I'm gonna suggest. This is something that outside of a full training, which I'm not going to do today. I may do something like this as, things kind of shake out. And really at this point, it's about being ethical. It's about being transparent about what you do with customer data and how you use that data. It's about being very clear in your privacy policies, on your opt-in forms, on your opt-in boxes, what you do, what you collect, how you're going to use it, what you're going to communicate with people. And again, most of you out there are like me. You're in the expert business. So you just want to be clear about what you're doing with your list, and you probably also want to throw something in there for partner promotions. But again, most of us here are not data brokers. We're not selling the data. We're not allowing third parties access to our databases, anything like that. So for the most part, for most of you, it's about cleaning up that privacy policy. It's about updating your opt-in forms anywhere they appear to be very clear about what you do with that data and having a nice link to your privacy policy. If you have anybody in your system that you're worried about, like you can't trace where they opted in, or you can't say where that data came from, or you can't trace it to, an opt-in or an order, or, this may be another example. If you move databases and so you don't have that opt-in information anymore, this could happen. You may at that point need to send out a reminder email or do something like that. But for most of you, I know at this point, you don't have to do much. And Kim, awesome. That made GDPR much more clear. Again, Canada has Kim, I know you're located in Canada. Canada has similar rules, consumer-friendly rules about data where and so chances are, since you operate in Canada, you're already compliant with a lot of these things because the same things are true in Canada. That people have a right to their data, they have a right to be forgotten. You just have to be very clear about what you're doing with any data that you collect. And if somebody asks you to delete it, they unsubscribe, or they get in and they can delete it themselves with most of these systems now, you have to honor that. So you can't like download all your data, your shady data to a spreadsheet, and then, if it's in the EU, you can't download all your shady data to a spreadsheet and do whatever you're going to do with it. Now, none of this applies to the United States. You see major global companies doing this, but if you're only targeting the United States, this doesn't apply. And Canada doesn't apply either. It's just most of these companies that are big data processors like Facebook, Google, major companies have to do that. So in short, update your privacy policy, update your opt-in forms, make things super clear about what you're doing with data. And if you have people that, you might have lost their opt-in information, or you might not have their buyer information tracked somewhere, you're going to need to send them, the updated privacy policy and let them know that they have to opt in. But this could be a good thing in the end. I don't think anybody really knows at this point, since it hasn't passed and we haven't started seeing court cases and all that. I don't think anybody really knows how all of this is going to shake out, but it's really important, that you do those basic pieces by the 25th, which is when this turns on. I know for some of you, and again, I'm not a lawyer, so don't take this as legal advice, but chances are, most of you out there, it's probably not a big deal if you're not done right on the 25th. I know, again, the EU police might come and say something to me. That's okay. Chances are they're not going to be too worried about you and what you're trying to do. So let's just leave it at that. So GDPR, that's what you need to know. Make sure that you're compliant in that space. So Julia, welcome. Sorry I didn't say anything earlier. I was in the middle of my GDPR conversation. I'm going to post about 5 different articles. Thanks to Milana, who had that resource. Thanks to Lori Hand, who also shared some other resources that I saw. So I'm going to post basically everything that I've been collecting. If you want to read more about it, you can. Most of these articles are saying the same thing I just said in a few sentences. Okay, so let's talk. Let's go to Renee's question. Oh, and actually, based on that, I want to go back to talking about the giveaway real quick, and then I'm going to move to Renee's question. So, as I mentioned, I was part of this summit, the Online Rocking Visibility Summit. And prior to that, knowing that I was part of this giveaway and knowing what I was doing and knowing that I was going to do some Facebook advertising and some retargeting, I got in touch with my Facebook rep. So many people who place Facebook ads don't realize that most of us have access to a Facebook representative. Yes, there are actually human beings that work at Facebook. If you have an ad account and you've done ads over the years, they're called your Facebook rep. You can schedule a meeting with them. Oftentimes, when you start contacting them, they reach back out to you. Facebook even has very extensive in-house training that they call Blueprint, which I've gone through many times over to use myself to learn about all the stuff that I train you on with Facebook ads. Facebook actually has a lot of resources for these things. So I chatted with them and said, all right, obviously over the past 6 months, we've seen this huge shift in Facebook ads. We've seen, this privacy policy stuff is starting to have an impact. Facebook's algorithm changes are starting to have an impact. What do you recommend? And so what they recommended is pretty much what I've been recommending over the past probably more than a year, which is video is still key in these things, which it was true for me. I did, if you look back on this Explore Momentum Facebook page or you look on my website, I did a very short, probably too long by Facebook standard. I did about a 3-minute video, which was mentioning to people like, hey, I'm doing this interview that talks about being more visible online and that type of thing. So drove some video viewers to that. Now, video viewers are still the cheapest type of Facebook advertisement there is. So if you're not using video and you're going to do Facebook ads, or you're not using Facebook Live and you're not using video viewers as part of your advertising, you should be, because that's Facebook's number 1 advice. Then number 2 is based on your video viewers, or people who actually watch the video, sit through it, do those types of things, you start to build those retargeting audiences. And again, I'll talk a lot more about Facebook ads in future episodes. I have full webinars on it. If you're interested in knowing more about that, post in the comments and I'll send you those webinars. I know Julia out there has been through my whole Facebook results course where I talk about this for 10 plus hours, talking about these things. But really, and this was true, combining the power of the video with building retargeting audience from that, And then, focusing a little bit on my existing email list, which is not very large. Even though I'm a digital marketer, I mostly have built email lists and focused on doing that for other people or for other companies or for people I've worked with over the years. So for me, doing that really allowed me to get a solid promotion going for under $50, to be able to get, that retargeting done, to be able to make people aware of what I'm doing. So the simplest campaign all of you should be paying attention to, just like I did, in leveraging that content and in leveraging that interview, is, video promotion, retargeting to your video viewers, building audiences, that way, based on people who have watched a certain amount of the video, or anyone who has watched a portion of the video, was enough to really make a difference in that type of thing. Thanks, Julie. She says it was a great class and she learned a lot and is actually implementing what she's learned. So with that, since Julia is out there and is always such a good participant, I'm going to jump on her question, then I'm going to cover Renee's question. So Julia says, I'd like to know more about sponsorships for both programs and live events. So let's talk about that, because most people, sponsorships are a great additive revenue source for speakers and for any of us that have an audience. So here's the reality of what I want to simplify for those of you who go, well, sponsorship, like I'm not big enough for that. You'll hear a lot of people say that. But here's why sponsorship is so important to speakers and experts and any of us that are information marketers. Because we're building an audience. Our number one job for each one of us is to build a list. So if I were to go to a company that served my list, so like I target anyone who is an aspiring speaker, an aspiring author that is, in the process of developing programs or products or those types of things. So that's my audience. There are many other businesses and experts and people out there who want to reach that same audience. Like I have great partners like Karen, who's a publisher who wants to reach that audience to help them get their book published or get their book done. Or people out there who are looking to provide services, maybe merchant services, maybe web development services, maybe, advertising management services, maybe partnership management. So sponsorship in short is, if I'm developing an audience, and especially a targeted audience that wants a specific thing or that's looking for a specific type of service, chances are other people want to reach that audience as well. Other businesses want to reach the same audience that I want to reach. If I'm doing the work to do it, if I'm creating the content, a lot of the time, getting sponsors is a very viable option. So what do you need to get sponsors? Let's talk about that simply. So first and foremost, you need to track things. We just talked about GDPR, and a lot of people need to track things for that. But I think a lot of new speakers or experts are too disorganized on their data collection. So if you're going to be hosting webinars and trying to get sponsors for that, or you're going to be having, sponsors be part of your email sequences, or you're going to have a sponsor come and set up a booth at an event, a lot of times you need to have your ducks in a row as far as, what your numbers look like. How many people are going to be attending that event? So how many people is there an opportunity for that potential sponsor to be in front of? And now keep in mind, if you're doing a live event sponsor, it will not necessarily just be the attendees of that live event that the sponsor will be seen in front of. All your marketing material, your promotion material, your ads, your emails, all those things. If you have a sponsor, you could offer, space in, that advertising, that email, that marketing for your sponsor as well, which gives them a larger potential reach. So in general, a sponsor, wants to reach your audience as bad as you do. So if you're doing that work, you can partner with sponsors oftentimes who want to do the same thing based off of what you're doing, or who want to, and a lot of times sponsors will even collaborate with you to get that done. So don't just think about the audience that may be right in front of you, which may be the smallest of the audiences that you're putting together. Keep in mind, you have all the marketing material and all of those things going forward. But to get a sponsor's attention, you need to have your ducks in a row. You need to know specifically how many potential people do you have the ability to get in front of, and be as transparent about that as you can, but also make sure that you're including your whole audience. I think a lot of people underestimate their own reach. So make sure if you're going to be doing promos on Facebook and reaching out to social media and your email list and, doing paid advertising and doing all that, you want to make sure those numbers are included in your pitch to a sponsor. Let them know, my intention is to spend, a big budget on advertising, and you have the potential to get in front of, the larger number of audience, to the largest number of audience possible for this type of thing. You then second need to have packages for that sponsor. So what specifically are you going to give them? Are they just going to get a logo on your program? Are they just going to get a logo in your emails? Are they going to get, dedicated space at your event, like a vendor table or a booth? Are they going to get stage time at your event? Or are they going to get interview time on your digital events or your webinars or those types of things? So you need to be very clear about what your packages are. And typically you want to have more than one option, because you might have smaller sponsors that just want to have their logo show up, or might just want to have a link to their website, on your sales page or whatever it is. But you may have larger sponsors that want to actually actively take part in the event. So you need to have those packages very clear about what the expectations are. And so you need to be clear about your reach, which is what we're talking about. How many people can they get in front of? You need to be clear about your goal and the sponsor's goal. So how is what you're putting together helping them reach their goal? And then you need to be clear about their options. So, there typically needs to be, at least one option that's very clear about what they get. But ideally, 2 or 3 different options depending on the level of involvement that they want to have. And so in my experience with events, I've had sponsors that are as hands-on as helping bring people to an event and being marketing and promotional partners, because again, it only helps them. I know some people that sponsor and then they may serve as the biggest promoters for that type of event, because again, it's in their interest, because they believe that you're going to put on a great experience and they know that they're going to be there and are heavily involved in the event. So they want to make sure that that event is successful and goes well, because it makes everybody look good. So sponsors are essentially just a paid type of partner. They're paying you to get that exposure, to get that reach, to get what they're doing. But you have to have those packages together. You have to have your potential reach, and you have to have their goal in mind. So that is really what's required in getting sponsors. For a live event, I love the idea of having a specific package that's just promotion, so they're showing up on all the material. So my beginner package would be they're showing up, their logo or their website is going to be showing up in emails, it's going to be showing up on any printed materials, it's going to be showing up in an event program or an agenda or something like that. And then, maybe they'll have some display advertising in the room. That's normally my option A, is, kind of the display advertising option. And then, my option B might be that they get dedicated space at the event. Maybe they even get like a solo promotion or a solo email. So, I will send out, to all the attendees of the event or to all the registrants of that event, I may send out a message for that company, a sponsored message for that company. I may even do ads at that, second level, where I'm, doing a little bit that's kind of co-branding us and putting us together so that people realize they've sponsored me and I'm endorsing them. And in general, that is more of an active level of a sponsorship where I'm doing something like that. And then, at the highest level, they're essentially, high-level event partners where, they're getting some stage time. They may host their own event at the event. So you'll often see this where, a sponsor may host a lunch or a dinner. They may host a cocktail, hour or something where they have dedicated time at the event. And this all depends on what your goal is for the event, what your scope is for the event, and how active you want those people to be involved. But, just by understanding what you want and understanding who you're trying to reach and what your marketing efforts are going to look like, and then kind of putting together some numbers of your potential reach, you can take those numbers and those packages and go get sponsors fairly easily. Again, in my experience, I've had sponsors at all of those levels, kind of beginning, middle, or end, that have been very effective in what they do. And I actually have, some friends that specialize in sponsorship, so I'll look forward to trying to get them to do an interview on this show and maybe talk a little bit more about that. But specifically, I've used sponsors for that. So sponsors, and depending on how good you are at this, I wouldn't count on this in the early days, but as you get more experienced about hosting events and what your marketing looks like and what your exposure looks like, a lot of the time, your sponsor dollars can pay for your event expenses. So, with the larger event companies that I've worked with over the years, sponsors generally paid the majority or much of the expenses associated with that event. So everything that came in from a sales perspective, product, services, programs, whatever, were essentially profit to the company because the sponsors were covering the event expenses. So for those of you out there doing, your first event, your first in-person event, or, your first live event, you may want to consider that to allow for potential, space at the event, vendor booths, stage time, those types of things. But it has to fit into your agenda. It has to make sense based on your goals, doing what you're doing. And you don't ever, one big thing, you don't ever want to take on a sponsor or a partner that you don't feel comfortable working with, like somebody that you don't agree with or you wouldn't recommend or you wouldn't endorse or you don't like them. You don't want to take the dollars just to take the dollars. Like sometimes it's easy to do that and say, oh, well, they're willing to pay, so I'm willing to let them sponsor and be a part of the event. But don't do that. If you're not willing to refer to that person and then that person's standing on your stage and you're telling people, hey, you should work with this person, it's a very uncomfortable place to be. I have been the speaker at events where that has happened before, where either I or the company I was working with didn't necessarily love a sponsor or didn't work with them. It creates a lot of awkward energy. So don't just take the dollars to take them. Kind of get your ducks in a row. And I will reach out to some of my friends that do this more intensely to get even more specific. But you would be surprised. All of us marketers, myself included, want to reach out to interested audiences. If you have the audience that I want to reach, then I want to partner with you to reach that audience, just as I did with this Rocking Online Visibility Summit. I wanted to partner not only to share a lot of content, but I wanted to partner in order to be next to those big speakers and to provide great value to my people. So I wanted to participate for that reason because I was in alignment with the goals of that event. So really key, important thing to keep in mind and to think about for what we're doing there. But sponsorship, what you need to have, your potential reach, good handle on your numbers, clear packages of what they're going to get depending on, the level. And I would recommend having at least 2 packages, like a visibility package and then a direct involvement package. And then you just have to go forth and start reaching out. You would be shocked at how easy it is once you have those 3 things organized, even in a semi-presentable fashion. You'd be surprised at how easy it is to go out and start reaching out to potential sponsors, and think about people that are that want to reach a similar audience to you, but have a different type of offering or have a compatible offering, but may not be the exact same thing that you do. So and you're looking for that when you're looking for joint venture partners as well. So you should be looking for that when you're looking for sponsor dollars as well. So hope that was helpful, Julia. If there's anything else you want me to clarify with that, please go ahead and ask that follow-up. I will answer that in the comments. But for this minute, I'm going to move on to Renee's question, and we'll go from there. So, hi, my name's Renee, and Renee posted this in our Your Momentum Now community. If you're not part of Your Momentum Now, please, again, check out the group that's linked on this page. Sign up at yourmomentumnow.com. You can find that there. But she asked this question in our community. It was in great detail, and this kind of illustrates a very common thing that I see with a lot of aspiring speakers and experts. So she says, my name's Renee. I am a mental health therapist and holistic coach. I work with special needs populations and special groups of people. I work with those disenfranchised from society, such as the disabled. I work with people with special needs and people that's just repeating. I'm writing a book, I'm getting ready to do a podcast, and I'd like to do a little more speaking. I believe there's messages to be brought out, there's things to be said, we need to do things in an empathic and loving, sharing way. I would love to help people work to find their value, understand what they're worth, and be known as a whole new specialist. So, the thing that jumped out to me about this question and this kind of conversation that we started, and I actually responded a little bit in the comments, but the thing that jumped out to me was there were 3 major things that were talked about there. I'm writing a book, I'm getting ready to do a podcast, and I'm looking to do more speaking. So when I'm talking about the speaking or expert business, that's actually kind of the end destination. Generally, by the time that you have a book, a signature product or program, and a live event, you normally should be at least a 6-figure level, but generally a 7-figure speaker has those 3 things in line. In fact, when you work with me, whether it's in a training program or you're coaching with me, that's the destination, which is a 7 or 8-figure speaking business. And to have a 7 or 8-figure speaking business, if you watch the very first episode of Expert Momentum, I said those are the 3 things you need. You got to have a book, you got to have a signature product or program, you got to have a signature event. Those are the 3 things you need to have. Now, the mistake in this, or the challenge in this, it's not necessarily a mistake, but the challenge in this is trying to take on all 3 of those projects at the very beginning at once. So let me talk a little bit to that specifically. So the reason is especially when you're looking at something like a book to start, is the amount of time investment and the amount of clarity that you have coming into the project. Now, in particular, Renee talked about the audience that she's trying to reach out to, which is an audience that's generally going to be served by community programs, or they're not necessarily going to be a large buying audience of these types of things. Doesn't mean no one in that audience has the capability to buy things or be part of training programs, but it's a massive effort, and especially if your business success is hinged around reaching out to a low-income population, or a population that may not have a big buying cap, that's really going to restrict your ability. So first of all, you have to kind of look at your business model and say, all right, if I'm trying to reach out to that and I had to prioritize, I had to say, all right, if I was just going to focus on one, if I'm going to focus on the book, a signature product or program, or the speaking, which am I going to do? Which is going to have the highest impact on what I do? And in general, my recommendation is going to be the speaking. That's almost always going to be where I start. It's why I started this show, focusing on your expert angle, focusing on being a speaker, because speaking is something you can do right now. Like, any one of you watching this can be a speaker today. You can turn on your Facebook Live, you can go out even if you want to and get a space and host your own event using something like meetup.com or eventbrite.com, even if there's only a few people there. Speaking is something that you can do right now. Developing a program or writing a book is generally something that's going to take a little bit longer. You want to do a little bit of research going into these things. You want to work with teammates who know how to do these things. And this is also a trap that so many people get into, is then when you've got your product or program, then you got to figure out your membership site, and you got to figure out your promotion plan and your marketing, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which just makes these things more challenging. The good thing about consistently speaking and positioning yourself as an expert is you can focus on working on that, testing out your ideas, seeing how they work, and seeing what formats work for you. Like, are you good at webinars or not? Are you good in a live event setting or not? Are you good in more intimate groups or larger groups? You can start to do those things by challenging yourself to start speaking now. And obviously the most obvious and easy way to do that is with social media. I already talked about how important video is, but we all have the ability now to essentially build our own stages and build our own outlets. So my immediate concern in that question was twofold. It was, your market's a challenging market to get at, and then your priorities, if those are the 3 things you're working on, are going to hamper you even further. And then she actually went on later in the question, I didn't include that in this, to mention that she's someone, part of the reason she's so passionate about this is she struggles with her own disabilities and her own challenges, which makes that even harder and makes it even more important to prioritize yourself and to say, all right, if I'm brand new to this, or I'm thinking about becoming well known for what I do, what should I be doing first? The answer is speak as often as you possibly can. You need to get out on the Facebook Lives. You need to schedule your webinar tools. There are many free webinar tools that you can get away with when you're starting. You want to start reaching out to partners and do giveaways or interviews or podcasts or any of those things like I mentioned, as you see me do and as you see many other speakers do. You want to talk as often as possible, for hours a day, even if it's possible, to get your message more refined, to get more clear on what you want to do and how you want to do it. And doing that also leads to your signature products and your signature program. So I'm testing things all the time. I certainly have a core curriculum that I've developed over many, many years to get to that core curriculum, but I'm still testing new ideas all the time. It's why I do my show, this Expert Momentum, and I've done it in various formats because this allows me to work with new material. It allows me to test new things. And so for me, it's just as important as it is for anybody else to be speaking and to be putting myself out there as often as I possibly can. I feel that most people get focused too much on the book or get focused too much on the program and the videos and the things they're going to film around that, rather than saying get yourself on a consistent speaking or content development schedule. You need to do that first because everything else will come from that. And Julia can attest to this. Your book could be, transcribed speeches or transcribed webinars. You may be writing your book as you're talking your book. You might develop your program. Your program may come from various modules of different webinars you've done or your podcast that you've done. So I don't necessarily think the podcast is a bad idea. And I don't think speaking is a bad idea. I think that's where I'd be focusing my energy. If you've already started the book, obviously you want to continue down that path. I'm not saying you can't do that, but I'm saying it's a lot to take on. And then you want to be looking for other opportunities. So inevitably, we know we want to service that special needs population, which is great. However, standing behind that special needs population oftentimes are caregivers. Now, caregivers are an audience that are often underserved. They're people that actually, do often work, or they have to support the person with special needs. They have, a career or business or whatever they have. So a lot of times they may have, higher buying potential. So you may want to start by focusing on that audience first, because again, they have a much higher likelihood of actually being able to work with you to start. And as you start to become more successful reaching out to that audience, you can then, start to work with that audience to attract the audience you actually want to work with. The simplest way to talk about that is you have to target a profitable market as well. You can't just target a market that may not be able to work with you or might need sponsorship or they might need scholarship to do that. If you're starting in that business and especially putting this much dedication and this much work towards it, you definitely need to make sure that you have your formula right about who are you going to approach, what are you going to offer them, and where are you starting in this space, which for the most part, for those of you who haven't done enough of this, it's starting to develop a consistent content strategy. Just use the free stuff for now. Use your cell phone for now. If you don't have high-end material or high-end cameras or any of that stuff, you can get away with it, but speak as often as you can and make sure that you're talking directly to that audience, because it's challenging to start a service-oriented business like that, especially without having runway, without having your own sponsorship or income. It's tough to walk that road. So you've got to have your priorities in order. You do need all those things in the course of building a 7-figure business. But my concern again is looking at those three. If I had to say between writing a book, doing a podcast, and speaking, I would be speaking as often as I can. A podcast could be part of that, but a podcast is just a distribution model. And at this point, I would focus more on, rather than worrying about the technology for a podcast, just use your Facebook Live, use your YouTube, start building audiences that way to start, and then, syndicate those as a podcast as time goes on. But you can start speaking now. Make sure you're talking to the right audience. And again, this is a huge thing in that creates so much overwhelm. And if Kim's still out there listening, that's exactly what Kim coaches people on, is overwhelm because of questions like that. It's tough if you're focused on too many things to start. It can make it really, really challenging. So make sure that you leverage these free tools and those types of things. All right. So my next question is from Onik, not the same Onik that Kim knows or that I work with, who has an amazing company called Mastering Ascension. A different Onik from LinkedIn came in with this. Kim says, one thing at a time, with lots of exclamation points. She's exactly right that one thing at a time. With those, I would pick one and really prioritize and focus on that. And if I could pick one, speak as often as you can. Don't worry about the podcast as much. So from Onik, she says, I'm currently looking for a job and want to engage in a new challenge where I use my skills learned in academia and management consulting. I want to be the bridge between research groups and industrial partners, i.e. startups. I'd like to get advice on how do I increase my visibility, how to define exactly the niche and where I could find such a job, and how to get in touch with relevant stakeholders. So, even though this is, and I most often talk to business owners and entrepreneurs who are looking to do this in a particular way where that's becoming your brand, but I love this term that I've heard over the years called entrepreneurship. So even if you're going to get a job or even if you're advertising yourself, the rules of engagement for marketing don't change, whether you're trying to find a job, whether you're trying to become known for something, or whether you're trying to build a business around what you know. Ideally, you're going to be doing all three of those things, but if you're in the process where a job makes more sense, that's a perfectly viable option. But the reality is you have to do all the exact same things that we're talking about on these shows and that we're talking about in terms of organizing yourself. So I would say what you need to be doing is thinking through and developing a basic content strategy for yourself. So the first question is, obviously, since you have some familiarity and experience with these, what are the goals of those research groups and what are the goals of those startups? And what content do you have that you can share with them, whether that's video content, reports, newsletters, white papers, programs, trainings, skill building, interviews, whatever it is that you can offer to them. You need to start mapping that out and treating your, search and treating your job hunt essentially the same as any other marketer would treat a startup business, with a content plan and then executing on that plan. So most people, again, especially if you're thinking about a job, may not be thinking big enough about those goals. So why do you need this even if you're looking for a job? Well, there's nothing that positions you better than that. The fact that you're actually willing to be the person that puts yourself out front and speak and develop content immediately gives you a level of credibility and expertise that most people won't have. Most people are too afraid to create content. They don't leverage the platforms this way. And so the fact that you're putting yourself out in that way already gives you a leg up because you're establishing an expertise, and that's going to make you more visible. So if I'm trying to increase my visibility to them, I'm going to be creating some content, and I'm going to be then starting to send that content out to the relevant people on wherever I'm trying to hunt for them, whether it's LinkedIn, Facebook, doesn't matter where it is, but you need that content. How do you define that niche? Well, that depends on what you know and what your experience is. So if you don't know what you know and what your experience is, the same advice I just gave to Renee applies to you. You need to start speaking as often as you can. You need to start practicing developing your content. You need to get in front of the webcam, in front of the phone cam, on the microphone, and start talking about specific areas. The easiest way to do this, and I talked about this before on this show, is to imagine that you're sitting at a table with either these research groups or with these industrial partners. And I want you to imagine that they're asking you questions based on your experience, your education, your knowledge, your skills about their goals, about how you can help them reach their goals. So they're asking you relevant questions, you're responding to them. So just write down what would 2 or 3 of those questions be, and then record your answer to those. So and almost like I'm doing in this Q&A format. Even if these are questions that you're imagining to make up, they're still relevant to those partners. Then you have a reason to reach out to these people. You have content which gives you a reason to reach out to these people, as opposed to just saying, hey, I'm looking for a job, or hey, I'm looking to get in front of you, let's start a conversation, which you can still do that. Doesn't mean that's not viable to reach out that way. But the content and the ability to speak, or the ability to create something of value, immediately puts you at a different echelon. That gets people looking for you. And you're still going to do outreach and those things, but that gets people looking for you too, and saying that, hey, you're willing to put it out there. You're willing to position yourself in this way. And so just having content specifically, ideally video content, but even written content, newsletters, white papers, blog posts, whatever it is, gives you the reason to reach out to these people. And Julia said in the comments as well, and make connections on LinkedIn. Definitely that too. But you've got to be willing to put it out there in a specific way. And so content would be the biggest thing. Increasing your visibility is start shooting those videos. Do, as many of those questions as you can. Even if those are only 30 to 60 second videos, it gives you the reason. So when you're reaching out, instead of just saying, hey, I'm looking for a job, be like, hey, I have compiled a list of, the biggest questions I get asked by startups or the biggest questions I get asked by research firms. I wanted to send this to you and see if you'd like to talk about it. It just gives a way different positioning than, hey, I'm looking for a job. And of course, I'm not saying that you're doing one or the other. I'm just positioning based off the question. So you need to have a personal branding strategy, a personal content strategy for that. And your personal branding just starts with what you know, your experience, your story, your education, your expertise. And at that point, the fact that you're willing to sit down and start creating that content, whether it's in front of a video camera or, just audio or webinars or, even written articles, the fact you're willing to do that puts you ahead of most of the competition. Most people just don't do that. Most people have portfolios of work they've done for other people. Most people aren't willing to take a position on a certain aspect of their expertise or those types of things. That helps you get there. And the niche is determined by, as you create this content, what's coming naturally to you. And you will find that some things are very difficult and some things come very naturally. If you're like, all right, I'm going to answer this question and my target is a 30-second response, and then you find like now all of a sudden you're on minute 10 and you're still going and you still have tons to say, that's probably the niche you want to target. It's the thing that you have the most experience, expertise, knowledge, awareness of. That's where you want to go. Or if you have the opposite happen, where you kind of ask yourself that imaginary question and then you're like, I can barely talk about this, or I don't know what I would say, or I don't know what I would do, or how I would answer that, you probably don't want to focus in that area. Some things will come naturally, some won't. Your niche should be, and really anybody who's in this conversation about what is my niche, what comes to you the most naturally, who needs that thing, and how can you create attractive, compelling content to bring that person in. That still hasn't changed. That's never really changed. That's been the way marketing has been, forever. You had to have something, whether it was compelling product, content, ad material, whatever it is, you've always had to have that. The same rules apply to the entrepreneurial world, which is saying it doesn't matter where you got the skills, where you got the experience. It matters what those research groups want, what those industrial partners want, how you're going to do that. So do that little exercise. Ask yourself 3 to 5 questions. Start recording little videos. Start seeing where that goes. Obviously, those are things that even when you get a job, you can continue to leverage, on your personal site, in your personal branding, in those things that you're doing. And a lot of times, again, those could attract other people. It may even lead to the development of, speaking opportunities or a platform or engagement in some way. You just have to be willing to put yourself out there. And if you don't know how to do that or what that looks like, I have this great organizer. I actually have had it on the screen the whole time. If you haven't been paying attention to it, go through and answer my questions, which is exploremomentum.com/preview. Gives you a 30-page ebook that is chock full of questions about what do you talk about, how are you going to organize a training or an event, and all sorts of things. Now, not necessarily all of those will apply to you for this type of search, but many of them will. So go through and answer them to the best of your ability. Grab that organizer. That's why I love to do little Q&A questionnaires like that or Q&A sessions like this, because it, again, goes, all right, I can clarify. Can I talk to this audience? Am I knowledgeable about that? Do I have a lot to say about those things? And the answer is, of course I do. So think about your personal branding. Personal branding applies to everyone these days, whether you know it or not, whether you realize that employers are looking at your Facebook or LinkedIn profiles or not matters. There are many jobs that especially with marketing companies that look at your profile, and if they don't feel you have the reach or the connections or something that they like in their profile, oftentimes they'll disqualify you as a candidate. Personal brand really matters, and that just applies even more to this conversation about if you're going to have a personal brand, you may as well position yourself as a well-known expert. You may as well position yourself as the go-to person in that space. And if you're not doing that, even if you think you don't need to, it's something you should consider, especially if you're thinking about a career. All right. One more question from LinkedIn should get us through today. And again, I love doing these episodes. So if you guys keep the questions coming, I will do Q&A episodes or live interview episodes as often as I can. I love doing this format. This is kind of similar to the previous questions, but it wraps things up nicely, which is why I put it as our last one. Manisha asked me, what do you need to know when positioning or starting a blog? So a blog is just the written form of your speaking or expert presence. So obviously we talked about GDPR at the beginning. Make sure when you're starting your blog that, you have all your ducks in a row. You have your privacy policy, you have your compliance in place. You know who you want to reach out to and be doing those types of things. You want to know that. So then you go back to, all right, the core question. I know this is a generic one. Who do you want to reach out to? Who is the ideal reader for this blog? If you start speaking something or writing something and you're like, this doesn't apply to anybody, then stop doing it. You need to make sure that when you're writing to somebody, when you're creating content, that you have a particular person in mind. This may be somebody you know. Pardon me. This might be someone that, is a demographic, like you might sit down and do some demographics or something like that. Whatever it is, you want to have a particular person in mind, whether it's someone you've worked with in the past, a previous client, someone in particular, because anything that you create from a content perspective should be towards a specific person. And ideally, when positioning your blog, you want to be thinking about the things that are most important to that particular person. What is the biggest challenge they have right now? What is the biggest need they have right now? And how are you aligning your content or your conversation to meet that need or to give them hope based on there is a solution to that problem, or there are resources to meet your needs, or there are answers for your questions. So when you're thinking about your blog, everything always starts with the customer. It starts with the client. It starts with the reader. It starts with saying, who is going to read this thing? And is this urgent enough for them? Or is this important to them? Or does this matter to them? If it doesn't, you need to reset. And that, again, 99% of the time, this is a thing I run into with people who are starting new websites, is they are either trying to make up a problem. I see this happen a lot. Like they'll try to invent a problem, or they'll go, oh, well, I'm a really creative person. I can create a problem that people have. But if you couldn't imagine yourself sitting at a table and having someone sit across from you and tell you, oh man, I'm really having this problem. And people have worked with me. I know Julia and Kim have both worked with me. Annika has worked with me. I'll ask this all the time, especially when I see email copy or I see web page copy. Does anybody really ever sit down and say that? Does anybody ever really sit down and go, man, I really wish I could increase synergy with my teammates? Like, most people don't talk like that. Or do people really go like, man, I would love to have, a holistic wellness, spiritual lifestyle? That isn't generally what people would say. So you want to think about, what would people say if you were sitting at a table with somebody? And I'll use a great example because I know Kim's here, and even though she didn't ask me a question, we'll talk about her Camp Exhale retreat that she does with Anik, which really is about not just decluttering you physically, like decluttering your physical space, but it's about decluttering yourself at multiple levels. So like decluttering bad energy going on in you, so like a spiritual energy, decluttering your mind so that your mind's not crazy and anxious and racing around with lots of different thoughts or ideas. And then also that leads to, once you've decluttered yourself on a spiritual level and then a mental level, your space will adapt to that. Generally, you will start to be looking at clutter that exists in your space, and you'll start doing that. So if you're trying to position an event to those people, and obviously you know that the experience they're going to have after that event is that they're going to, feel much more clear. They're going to have their priorities in order. They're going to be much more aligned internally with themselves. You want to be making sure that you're going, all right, well, the person who wants this is probably a person who's experiencing a ton of clutter or stress or disorganization or those types of things. So when I'm creating content for that person, I'm going to speak to that directly. Like, how bad is that problem they have with disorganization? How big are the piles growing? How often, do they feel like they have no time in their day because it's dominated by clutter in their life, or clutter in their energy, or anxiety, or poor energy, or those types of things? I'm not necessarily, and then I'm going to have as many conversations as I can as well to say, all right, at this point, I want to start talking to people and hear how they talk about it. I want to hear what they say. As Kim says, what she says in there, our campers will say they are so overwhelmed they need a break before they crash or kill someone, which is true. I think that burnout, I mean, it's the statistics are going up. I know I've suffered from this both physically and mentally in my life. Burnout is everywhere right now. Like, burnout is such a huge issue with people, and overwhelm is such a huge issue with people because the clutter isn't always immediately obvious. Like, there's electronic clutter for most of us. Like, there's the digital clutter, which is so overwhelming to some people, and they just don't even realize how bad it actually is. Then there's the physical clutter. Then there's the life clutter, you know, the family stuff that's going on that's not in order. Clutter is so, you know, present in people's lives at this point that most people don't even realize how far it's gotten into their life. So when I'm positioning an event like that, or when I'm thinking about starting a blog to reach out to those people, I'm going to make sure that I know, you know, who that person is and how they operate and what their priorities are and why they haven't done something about the clutter yet. Because most of them probably know they have clutter. Like, obviously, you know that you're stressed out before you're ready to kill somebody. You know you're stressed out, but there's a reason that you're not doing anything about it, or you feel like you can't do something about it. The best type of content or sales pages or emails or videos or anything I can position to those people is based on things they tell me directly. So if the words they're using is, I'm about to crash or kill someone, that's probably going to be the big old headline on my thing. Are you feeling like you're about to crash or kill someone due to your overwhelm? This is where you need to be. And then any content that I'm talking about or any promotion that I'm talking about. The closer that I can get to the audience's perspective, the client's perspective, the better off it's going to be. So when positioning your blog, Manisha, you need to be doing the same thing. You need to be saying, who wants to read this? Who needs to read this? What language do they use, and what problems do they describe, and what do they want, and how can I give that to them? And don't hold back on it. Don't hold back on giving it to them. Use your blog as a tool to build relationships, to get people to the next level. Blogging is a tremendous resource. It's something that you can use to generate lots of audience very, very fast. Blogs haven't died. It's just how you get people to them that have changed. And the methods even there, some of the traditional methods even still work there. So when positioning your blog, you have to know who it's for, what they want, and speak their language. That's how you position a blog. That's really how you position a Speaking and Expert business. And obviously here on Expert Momentum, that's what we're all about, helping you get success. I love doing Q&A sessions. As I mentioned in the comments, I'm going to post all of these articles for more research that I found on all of these different areas so that you too can get as well versed in the GDPR and understand that going forward. And so I'm looking forward to our next Tuesday Q&A session. If you've got them, email them in to me at this point. Great to know, Julia, that you're meeting with Linda. We'll be back next Tuesday for another episode of Expert Momentum.